Mistake 111. Wearing your reading glasses around your neck. This habit surely had to start with some librarian in the 1950s. Why is it that women, not men, buy those little chains to hang reading glasses around their necks? Are we more apt to lose our glasses than men, or are we just more willing to call attention to the fact that we're aging? In some department stores, you'll even find these chains displayed as accessories. In the name of full disclosure, I must admit that since the first edition of Corner Office was released, I have taken to using one of these chains for my own reading glasses. But I never use it in professional situations, but only when I'm shopping, on an airplane, or working at home, so that I don't lose them. At a workshop on developing presentation skills, there was one woman, apparently in her mid-50s, who held on to her reading glasses throughout her videotaped half-hour practice session. Not only did she hold on to them, but she also twirled them while listening to questions from the audience. Never once did she actually put them on, leading me to believe they were more of a prop than a requirement. At the risk of sounding ageist, I need to say once again that, unlike men, it's the rare woman who finds her credibility increasing with age. I'm on a one-woman campaign to change this by attempting to be a role model for how to age with grace. So although I don't think it's something to hide or lie about, I also don't think it's necessary to emphasize your age. Coaching tips. If you're concerned about being able to read your notes during a presentation, type them in a font large enough to see without glasses. Using a PowerPoint presentation will also serve to keep you on target with your topic without having to put your glasses on and take them off. If you need a prop, use a marker or a pencil. There's nothing wrong with holding it. Just take care not to tap, twirl, or click it, thereby creating a distraction from your message. A trick my ophthalmologist taught me is to wear a pair of plain glasses with the readers on the bottom. Even though I wear contact lenses to camouflage my severe nearsightedness, I wear the glasses over them so that I'm not continually putting on and taking off my readers. Since we're on the subject of glasses, keep in mind that they can be used as a prop to make you appear more mature if you have difficulty with being taken seriously because you look too young. Even if you don't require corrected vision, a pair with non-prescription glass can give you the appearance of being a bit more mature. Mistake 112. Accessorizing too much. Accessories can be your best friend or your worst enemy. I once watched a video conference in which former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright was a keynote speaker. She wore a lovely tailored dress, totally appropriate for the event, but she had on her trademark huge pin. To me, this detracted from her message. Throughout the presentation, I found myself focusing more on trying to figure out what the pin was than on what she was saying. I've learned to use accessories to manage the impression I often give that I'm very serious. In an effort to convey an impression of more levity, I accessorize with playful pins. One that frequently gets attention is of 3 women with wild hair and colorful dresses arm in arm. It's my way of getting across the message that I may be serious, but I like to have fun as much as the next person. Of course, if I'd been given feedback that I was too jocular, my tactic would be different. Carefully chosen, accessories add style and personality to otherwise conservative corporate attire. They convey a message about you that may not be heard through your words and presence alone. But when inappropriate or overdone, they detract from your credibility. Accessories make a statement. Consider what you want yours to be. Coaching tips. Don't wear long, dangling earrings to work. Depending on your size and hair length, aim for posts no larger than the size of about a quarter. Add an inexpensive pearl necklace and earrings to your accessory kit. They never go out of style. Match accessories to not only your outfit, but also what you will be doing that day. A whimsical pin might be appropriate for a day in the office when you're meeting only with colleagues, but not necessarily for one when you're making a strategic planning presentation. Similarly, the bigger the group you're speaking to, the bolder the accessories can be. Just be certain not to make the same mistake as Secretary Albright. Do the same as was suggested in the section on makeup tips. Turn your back to the mirror and quickly swing around. Does anything stand out about your accessories? If so, consider changing it. Mistake 113. Poor eye contact. There are a number of factors that contribute to the tendency to avoid another person's eyes. In some cultures, it's a sign of respect to look away when speaking with someone who is older or has more authority or stature than you. There's research that suggests avoiding eye contact is a sign of deception. Children won't look at us when they know they've done something wrong or when they're being scolded. When a woman avoids eye contact, it's usually a sure sign that she's uncomfortable or unsure of herself. If the eyes are the window to the soul, then you must use them to allow others to see your sincerity, self-confidence, and knowledge, and to see the other person's. A good place to observe this behavior is on television, when someone like Ann Curry or even Ellen DeGeneres conducts an interview. Both of these women have learned the art of eye contact. Note how they look people directly in the eye, especially when asking difficult questions. Similarly, note that when they're embarrassed or someone has said something that catches them off guard, they look away. What also makes these women so good at what they do is that by looking the other person in the eye, they often get a sense of what he or she is thinking and base the next question on this. You don't have to be a television interviewer to use eye contact to your advantage. Coaching tips. When you go to the movies, observe how the more self-confident female characters use their eyes to convey a message. Make a mental note of the specific behaviors that contribute to this impression. If you have been given feedback that you have a tendency to stare, get into the habit of looking slightly up or to the side when thinking about a response. This creates a break in the eye contact long enough to convey a comfortable pause. When greeting someone, be certain to look him or her in the eye. It puts you on an even footing with the person. Mistake 114. Airing your feelings in online public forums. In 2009, Dawn Marie Souza, a paramedic in Connecticut, used Facebook to call her boss a scumbag and suggest in unflattering terms that he wasn't qualified to be a supervisor. The company had a policy that prohibited employees from using the internet to say derogatory things about coworkers in the company, and she was promptly fired. Then, the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, found out about the termination and, believing that the policy was overly broad, filed a complaint against the company. The NLRB ultimately found that the policy violated the National Labor Relations Act, giving employees the right to discuss the terms and conditions of their employment with others. This is one that I definitely did not have to address a decade ago. Even if the laws are changing to protect your First Amendment right to free speech, it's just plain foolish to use social media to air your grievances against anyone. It's a pitfall, more for women than men, because 1, we tend to be more emotional, 2, we use social media more, and 3, we want to show our support for others. Pamela Mitchell, founder of the Reinvention Institute, whom I mentioned earlier, was telling me about a client of hers who has a bad habit of using her Facebook page to address every bone she has to pick with others. Whereas in the past, people would pick up the phone and commiserate with a friend to get something off their chests, now they post their feelings on Facebook and get immediate reinforcement from their friends and colleagues. As early as middle school, mean girls are using social media to write awful things about one another. It's the 21st century version of the slam book, a notebook that was passed around in which students would make comments about kids they didn't like. This extends into adulthood, with technology that has made it possible to say anything you want about someone else and in a matter of seconds have it distributed to hundreds of people in your network. The obvious problem is it's also available for viewing by anyone with access to a computer. Coaching tips. Don't use social media as your personal pulpit for punishment. It will almost always come back to bite you. If you've got a gripe, go directly to the person. This is what grown-ups do. They don't talk behind people's backs or make anonymous comments. They give others the courtesy of being able to respond to their grievances. And if that fails, they move on. If you've got a legitimate beef with a company or institution with which you do business, use a recognized public forum such as TripAdvisor.com, Yelp.com, or Angie'sList.com to factually explain your concerns. Mistake 115. Putting a stamp on with a steamroller. Another complaint men have about some women is that they never know if they're going to get Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. The inability to predict someone's reactions is one of the largest factors contributing to mistrust. We trust people who are consistent with us. They can be consistently nice to us or rude to us. It really doesn't matter. Either way, you come to trust how this person will treat you. In many cases, inconsistent behavior is not the byproduct of indecision, but rather the result of holding things in for too long. Nice girls can be like those old-fashioned radiators that operated on steam. If you let the steam build up for too long, the radiator would explode. When a nice girl finally has had enough and can't take it any longer, she blows up, and often at something that's inconsequential. There's a reason for the saying, it's the straw that broke the camel's back. When this happens, we can be described as putting a stamp on with a steamroller. Far too much emotion for what the situation warrants. People then wonder about how rational we are, make assumptions about what time of the month it is, or question our mental stability. I recall once when I had a private practice of psychotherapy, I was working with a woman who was severely depressed. She held everything in, finding it too risky to say what she really wanted or needed at home and at work. Then one day, her husband called in a panic and said, "You have to do something. She's gone crazy. She's breaking every dish in the house." And that was her first step on the path to being more mentally healthy than she had ever been before in her life. Coaching tips. Take more risks around regularly saying what's really on your mind. When you hold too much in for too long, you're going to either be depressed or at some point, and usually not an opportune one, explode. Expressing yourself in the moment or close to it allows you to hold an adult conversation rather than throw a hissy fit. Give yourself permission to not react in the moment, but rather revisit an issue after you've had time to cool off. Women tell me all the time that they just can't think of what to say as a retort, and as a result, wind up feeling badly about an encounter they had with someone. You don't have to be quick on your feet, but you do owe it to yourself and those with whom you interact to circle back as soon as possible after an incident to discuss how you felt and what you'd like to see happen differently in the future. Trust your emotions. Many times, we think we're making mountains out of molehills, so we overlook things that we actually have strong feelings about. Pretty soon, all of those things we thought we had let go of become the straw that breaks the camel's back. Even if you don't address an issue directly with the person who caused you to have the feeling, you can talk to a friend about your reaction and use that as an opportunity to let off steam. For more difficult conversations, practice using the desk script method in Mistake 91. It really is a great tool to help you prepare what you want to say in a way that encourages dialogue and diminishes the likelihood of a blow-up. Mistake 116. Holding a grudge. As the saying goes, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. When I said this in a public forum, I was accused of being sexist. Look, I didn't invent the saying. I'm just letting you know what people think when you can't move beyond a real or imagined slight. A number of years ago, I was brought in to do conflict resolution with two very talented women who could not stand to be in the same room with each other. This presented a dilemma for the boss, a male, who needed them to work collaboratively due to the fact that their roles in the company had some overlap. All he wanted them to do was play nicely together in the sandbox, and all each of them wanted was to be left alone by the other. Their behavior not only made his life miserable, but also reflected negatively on him when his management would ask, "Can't you control your staff?" I first met with each woman individually to get her perspective on the situation. As is usual in these cases, the story was like dual sides of the same coin, each with her own personal spin on what had transpired to result in a standoff. Then came what they thought would be the painful part, getting them in the same room to start the healing process. And here's how grudges can dissipate. Don't focus on the past. Focus on what you need to move forward. The only ground rule I have for conflict resolution sessions is that you can't rehash what happened in the past. It does absolutely no good. You've probably obsessed over the other person's transgressions for days, weeks, or months. Moving on requires you to identify what you want and need from the other person and what you have to offer them. The following coaching tips build on this premise. Coaching tips. Don't let slights fester. It's how they grow into seemingly unsolvable problems. An immediate, knee-jerk response to a slight is often counterproductive. Sleeping on it and addressing it the next day should give you enough time to plan your communication. When addressing what you perceive to be a slight, start from a place that assumes the best of intentions rather than the worst. Most emotionally healthy people don't want to hurt your feelings. They do so in a moment of not thinking, haste, or frustration. Cut people a little slack until you learn their intentions. Prepare in advance for meetings that are designed to clear the air. Don't wing it. First, enter the discussion with a clear statement about your feelings concerning what transpired, not with a description of what happened. Something like, "I was really embarrassed when you announced in front of the entire team that my department came in last for sales this quarter before you had the discussion with me." Next, let the other person know what you need from them in the future. This might sound like, "What would be helpful for me to remain motivated and keep my team motivated as well is for you to give me a heads up when those numbers come in so that I can discuss them with the sales folks." Finally, let the other person know what you have to give them in return. If you'll just do this, you have my word that I'll work vigorously to meet our sales quota next quarter. Once you have this discussion, let it go by focusing on the future. Mistake 117. Internalizing messages. Parents are guilty of giving children all kinds of messages that they carry with them for a lifetime. Not all of these are negative, but they do impact our self-esteem and how we see ourselves in the world. Whether it's, "You're just like your father, you'll never amount to anything," or "You're such a sweet girl, you're going to grow up and get married and have lots of children," the message sets the stage for a self-fulfilling prophecy. The messages are not always verbal. Sometimes they're implicit messages for how you should behave. Much of my coaching work begins with helping clients get in touch with those early childhood messages and examine the impact they have on the present. Our greatest strengths are often learned in response to implicit and explicit parental expectations or demands. As a result, we tend to over-rely on these and are reluctant to relinquish ones that are no longer effective. Let me give you an example. Claudia was the oldest of 7 children in her family. Both parents were alcoholic and depended on her to help raise the younger kids. As with many children who come from alcoholic homes, she was hypervigilant, very responsible, and quite protective of her siblings. No one told her she had to do this. She just did. These same behaviors served Claudia well early in her career. Her supervisors appreciated how she would show initiative, take new team members under her wing and show them the ropes, and always be on top of potential problems or barriers to achieving departmental goals. Later in her career, however, these identical behaviors kept her from reaching her full potential. What was once viewed as being on top of problems was now described as being too critical. Whereas her willingness to take new people under her wing was once appreciated, now she was seen as intrusive and overly controlling. And one of her greatest strengths, initiative, was now interpreted as grandstanding, trying to get the best projects for herself. Claudia had internalized the messages of childhood all too well, even though they were never actually verbalized. This will give you an idea of how well we must internalize verbal messages. Our work with Claudia was not to get her to stop doing all those things that served her well early in her career, but rather to provide her with a set of alternative behaviors from which she could choose when the situation called for it. For example, rather than always volunteering for difficult assignments, she needed to be more conscious of who else might benefit by learning from this project. And rather than being quick to point out mistakes, she might let some of the smaller ones go so that others could learn from them and not view her as quite so nitpicky. Coaching tips. Ask yourself which lesson learned in childhood contributes to your greatest strength and what complementary behaviors may be required to balance the strength. There's a tape that plays in our heads with childhood messages. When the messages on that tape hold you back from achieving your goals, use self-talk to tape over it. Consider therapy if the messages are so strong that you have difficulty taping over them. Post in a conspicuous place and frequently recite Eleanor Roosevelt's famous maxim, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." Mistake 118. Believing others know more than you. Betty is an organization development consultant with her own practice. For many years prior to forming her consultancy, she was an organization development manager at the corporate headquarters of a nationally known fast food chain. Between the two experiences, she can legitimately be called an expert in her field. One day, she met with a prospective client who wanted to talk to her about doing a team-building session. As this aggressive, know-it-all executive laid out the problem, Betty began to think it wasn't team building he needed, but a conflict resolution intervention between 2 employees. After the executive finished explaining what he wanted and why he wanted it, Betty suggested that team building might not be the appropriate path to take. She pointed out that when there is conflict between 2 employees and you do a team-building program, you may not get the results you want and needlessly include other team members in their dispute. The executive would not listen. He had used consultants in the past for situations such as these, and he knew how they worked. He was certain the situation would be improved through the team building. As with many consultants, Betty had to weigh the client's wishes against her best professional judgment. Does she walk away from the business opportunity to prove her point? Or could she possibly help this group using the methodology demanded by the client? In the end, she opted for the latter and facilitated a 2-day offsite for the executive's department of 12 staff members. She thought that perhaps he was right. He made a convincing case for the offsite, and Betty was open to giving it a try. The team building proved to be a total disaster. The majority of the time was spent trying to mediate the conflict between the 2 individuals whom the executive had mentioned in the first meeting. While at first Betty used the interaction between these two as a learning opportunity for everyone present, teaching listening and negotiation skills, for example, eventually the team tired of the tension in the room and began to mentally check out. In the end, the conflict was never resolved, and the other team members felt that the experience was a waste of their time. Betty learned the hard way that women often underestimate how much they know and put more stock in a stranger's opinion than in their own wisdom. From doctors to car salesmen, we think others know better. Betty acquiesced to the executive's assertion that he knew better than she did, and the results were catastrophic. Her reputation within the company was damaged, and the executive wound up blaming her lack of expertise rather than recognizing that she was correct in her initial diagnosis and recommendation. In the long run, she would have been better off saying no to the opportunity. Unlike men, we tend to admit it when we don't know something, but fail to trust ourselves when we do. Men can tell us something entirely wrong with more authority than any woman ever will. Worse yet, we believe it. Coaching tips. Before assuming someone knows more than you, ask a few probing questions to determine his or her expertise. Why do you recommend that? Or how do you know that? Will at least convey the message that you're not a pushover. Before asking someone else's opinion, be certain you really need it. As discussed earlier, asking a question to which you know the answer can diminish your stature. If something doesn't sound or feel quite right to you, it probably isn't. Buy time to think by insisting on a timeout to consider what's been suggested. Mistake 119. Taking notes, getting coffee, and making copies. Although it happens more covertly nowadays, at any minute during any given day, there has to be a woman somewhere in the world tearing her hair out about this problem. How many times have I heard a man say, "Let's have," fill in the blank with any woman's name, take notes, she has the best handwriting. Or, "Linda, would you mind making coffee?" as if it's really a question. Also, in certain female-dominated industries, which I will not name, but think the devil wears Prada, using employees to carry out your personal chores is common. In workshops and seminars, women frequently ask, "What should I do when I'm asked to make coffee for or take notes at a meeting?" The easy answer is, don't do it. What's harder is avoiding it. Each time we accept one of these tasks, we perpetuate the stereotype that a professional woman's role is to nurture, care for, and serve others at work. The inevitable result is that we feel either badly about ourselves or angry about the situation. Neither solves the problem. How can you respond to inappropriate requests? Well, it just so happens I have a few coaching tips. Coaching tips. Tell your boss about how you feel being given these tasks and suggest that the responsibilities be rotated. If he or she tells you it's no big deal, respond simply and non-defensively with, "It's a big deal to me." When asked in front of a group if you'll make copies or take notes, practice saying in a neutral, unemotional way, "I think I'll pass since I did it last time." Show that you're a good meeting manager. Make a checklist of meeting tasks and suggest that the department administrative assistant be assigned them. Introduce your corporate culture to the custom of having the newest person on the team perform these tasks. When asked to do personal errands, let the boss know you're happy to do them when you have time, but otherwise you don't want to take away from being able to do a good job at what you were hired to do. This may not be what he or she wants to hear, but consider your options. If you carry out the errands, you'll feel resentful, and if you don't, you may be fired. Pick your poison. If the errand requests persist, it's time to look for another job, ask for a transfer, or wait the boss out for a specified period of time. Mistake 120. Tolerating inappropriate behavior. Ebenetia was transferred to a developmental assignment in the finance department at her company headquarters in December. She was given an office on the executive floor, but when she arrived, she realized it had no desktop computer. Simple, she thought. I'll just call the IT group and get one. When she called, she was told there were none currently available, but there should be one she could have in about a week. 2 weeks passed and no computer. She called once again, and the IT manager apologized. His wife just had a baby, and her request slipped between the cracks. The computer intended for her had been given to someone else, a man, of course. He'd see what he could do. By now it was Christmas, and her office was closed for 2 weeks. I met with Ebenetia in her office in mid-February. Still no computer. She showed me a note she'd written to the IT manager. I understand you've been quite busy and that you are short-staffed. However, I think 2.5 months is a bit long to wait for a computer I need to perform my work. I would appreciate it if you would get the computer to me as soon as possible. What's wrong with the note, you ask? It's too understanding, too understated, and not specific. Here's my edited version. It's been 2.5 months since I first asked you for a PC, and despite numerous promises, I still have not received it. Since this seriously impedes my ability to perform my job, I will expect one in my office no later than Friday. If this is not possible, or if it does not arrive, I will assume it is due to matters out of your control and will ask your boss and mine for assistance. Please call later today to discuss further. This describes the problem, explains why it's a problem, specifies desired outcomes, lays out consequences. It contains all the elements of the desk script method described in Mistake 91. Coaching tips. Take a self-defense class. Defending yourself physically will shift your thinking about defending yourself verbally. Use more I messages as opposed to you messages. The latter tend to be more confrontational and point the finger rather than solve the problem. Listen to the difference. Turn this, "You're always interrupting me," into this, "I would appreciate it if you'd let me complete my sentence." Or turn this, "You can't do that to me," into this, "I'm not happy with how I've been treated. I'd like to offer some alternatives." Don't swallow your feelings. They'll only catch up with you in one way or another. Get in the habit of asking yourself how you feel when you're treated less than respectfully and express it in the form of an I message. I feel like a child when I'm spoken to in that way. I feel disrespected when my ideas are ignored. I feel that I'm being taken advantage of. I feel that I'm entitled to a reason why my request is being denied. Just because you don't react in the moment doesn't mean you don't have the right to go back and revisit an inappropriate encounter. When you're caught off guard, it can be difficult to come up with the right words. It's your prerogative to go back later on and say, "I was thinking about something that happened yesterday, and I'd like to tell you how I felt about it."